I would like to officially welcome you to episode 2 of Teacher Talks, brought to you by the UNCC Masters of Education program. We'll be right back with our discussion for today. Language Across Difference by Django Paris, and how does that apply to the teaching/education profession? Stay tuned. All right, so welcome to the second installment of our podcast, Teacher Talks. I am Wesley McLeod, and I am going to give you some very interesting critiques in regards to the reading Language Across Difference, brought to you are written by Django Paris. Firstly, I'm not going to give you a synopsis of the book. I really want you to pick up the book and read it, just to kind of give you like an overlooming justification behind the book being written. Django Paris decided to do a study of urban schools, or urban students within schools. And in this study, he examined a couple of students who are quote unquote identified as minorities. Now, like I said, I'm really trying to refrain from giving you a synopsis of the book, but I just want to help you to understand that this is a very good read. This is another read that is essential to the development of teachers within education. I think that this book should definitely be a required component of new teacher preparation programs. And to be honest, any teacher preparation program or any teacher program where you have professional developments or workshops, this book needs to be included, Language Across Difference, simply because as an educator, I've been teaching for the last 6 years. We have a very bad habit, and when I say we, I mean educators. Anybody within the educational framework or educational stakeholders, we have a bad habit of looking at demographics that are considered to be your priorities. So when you're considering like districts or you're considering classifications, you look at race, you look at socioeconomic status, and that's pretty much your two main demographics. Nevertheless, there are your sub-demographics that aren't necessarily considered when you are thinking about student outcomes, student achievement, and student socializations, especially those demographics such as sexual orientation and ethnicity and culture. Those two or three demographics are somewhat put on the back burner. And as a result of them being put on the back burner, they really impact our student outcomes who essentially live these on a daily basis. These students have to deal with the social matriculation going through school, and their ethnicity and their culture and their sexual orientation is not one of those demographics that are put in the back burner, especially when it comes to their development. Those are forefront demographics that they deal with and that they have to essentially be okay with, or that are essential to their identity while they're in school. And so what is so paramount about this reading, Paris's reading in Language Across Difference, is that it focuses on students and their ability to either handle or their ability not to handle those differences that are presented within those demographics, such as their culture. This book really makes you focus on culture and ethnicity and the development of students' culture and identity when they're in a school that doesn't necessarily prioritize the development of cultural identity. And so the students, such as Raul, such as Ella, have to come to an understanding of their culture while being essentially manifested and overran by a school system that somewhat compartmentalizes their ethnicity, and more so in looking at it through a racial lens instead of a cultural lens. And so as an educator, this is very important because when you're thinking about the relationships that you build with your students, you have to consider more than just the obvious or the prioritized demographics such as race and social economic status. There's an additional step that when you are developing those relationships with your students that needs to be incorporated within your daily interactions or your conversations or even your curriculum. When you're creating this curriculum, you have to be conscientious of students' cultures. And now, again, there's a distinct difference between ethnicity and race. And oftentimes, you'll be surprised the amount of conversations I have, and you have full grown adults who don't understand the difference. When you're thinking about a person's race, you're thinking about the categorization. When you're thinking about ethnicity, you're thinking about that further categorization. So, for example, Irish American, or I could be European, or I might be Nigerian, whereas race is more so the broad categorization. So when you have a student in a school or any type of setting and they are very privy of their ethnicity, what is being done to address those ethnic differences? Because again, we broadly address racial differences, but what is being done to address those ethnic differences? So in the book, there's a serious component. I'm trying, again, not to summarize the book. I really give a synopsis of the book, but in the book, in chapter 3, there's a emphasis on the Samoan ethnicity and how that culture constitutes a behavior or ideology that a student addresses. And the student is very comfortable with her ethnicity. However, within the grand scheme or the grand scope of her environment, that ethnicity is not cultivated for her to grow. Again, those students who exemplify the same ethnicity are compartmentalized. They're very small, and they just kind of remain to themselves. So it almost makes you think, what would be the impact if a student or a staff member or an administrator decided to, hey, let me take my lesson that might be on a certain topic and try to incorporate Samoan history or Samoan individuals that are very influential. Or let me figure out current individuals such as like The Rock, who who come from Samoan descent. And let's talk about how this Samoan descent has an impact onto their development. So again, when you're considering relationships, you have to take a deeper analysis of what makes this student who they are, not just those obvious demographics such as race, such as their socioeconomic status. Is much more than that. It's of course race, it's of course socioeconomic status, it's also their sexual orientation, it's also their culture. It could at times be, depending on the circumstance, it could be the religion. They're religious, so their religious preferences. Oftentimes we generalize our academic and social approach to meet the needs or the beliefs of a Christian principles. However, for example, there are plenty of students that we work with who might be Muslim, who might be Hindu. And when we make these blanket statements, or when we say, thank God for this, that creates them as the outlier. And at times it's done indirectly, and sometimes it may be done directly. So when we're addressing our students and when we're thinking about relationships with our students, we have to make sure that we consider all demographics. And the fact that Paris's study has more so of a deep analytical development of their demographics, especially when it comes to cultural identity and ethnicity, it's very, very paramount. Again, out of all the readings that have been required within the urban education master's program, this one is very, very analytical of ethnicity and culture and how that implicates a student's development. So I definitely suggest that you listeners definitely pick up this book, Language Across Difference, Django Paris, and really take it with take it and look at it and read it through a reflective lens. How can I take the information that was acquired and ascertained through this study and use it to develop my own practice, especially within the education field, an educational institution that really doesn't consider how are our students culturally and ethnically different. So definitely pick this up, and I thank you for listening to episode 2 of Teacher Talks. Hope that you have a good rest of your day. Remain restful, and remember, you make the difference.